What is going to be particularly awesome about this Zoom meeting is we got a really dynamic person speaking to us about the legislative process that has impacted us in the past, because we've all been in schooling. Public schooling impacts everything we do in the community. It impacts our future. The Garland ISD impacts our economy. We are one of the biggest employers of this area, with close to about 8,000 employees. So there's a lot of things that affect us. And so we got a really, really neat speaker that is a Garland owl, y'all. And he's gonna be speaking to us. And then what we'll do is entertain questions afterwards through the chat. We're only gonna entertain direct questions from the chat, not live. That gives us ample opportunity to see if there's some common questions that we're having, and it gives the speaker to be able to speak without interruption. Well, good morning. I want to welcome everybody to the second legislative briefing. My name is Dr. Lopez. I am the proud superintendent of the Garland ISD, what we refer to as Garland USA, because we're bigger than just our area. We're as big as the nation. Everything we do is affecting everybody across the nation. And today's a perfect example. The leader of TEA is from Garland. I also serve on the board. I'm on the chamber board, and I'm proud to be working hand in hand with all these individuals that are here today. And today I have the privilege to be your moderator. We're pleased to have the Texas Commissioner of Education, Mike Morath, returning to home and give insight on the progress and challenges of public education across our state. Today's event, though, is brought to us by the Gardner Wallace Financial Solutions Institute. And I would love to give Robert Gardner some time to speak and share what his company does. Robert.
Hi, thank you very much. I'm very excited to be part of this program. I'd like to start out by saying that I've made so many great relationships being around the Garland community, and the common denominator in the community is Garland pride. It's something you can feel. I'm proud to be involved with the community and the chamber. So Gardner Wallace is go to the next slide, please. Gardner Wallace is a firm. We're a wealth management financial planning firm with succession planning and contingency planning as well. I'll get into our services, but the main thing about this is we really simply put it's client's best interest first. It's always about the client's best interest. Next slide. There we go. And the reason that we do so well is really our team. We play like a team, we act like a team, and it's just fun to walk into the office. This is the reason our retention rate's so high. It's because of the players that we have on our team, and I really made this by saying we have a good time working here. Everyone enjoys it. Next. Run through this pretty quickly. Our services. There should be one more. Here it goes. So we do wealth management with asset, management and asset allocation. Behavior management is something we're really good at. When the market dropped 30% last March, we really helped our clients through that tough time of staying on their goals, staying focused, what they were trying to achieve, and not derailing them. And then cash flow and tax management, we help minimize the distribution. And if you're taking distribution or if you're growing, retirement income planning, we're great at Social Security and pension maximization and minimizing state tax liability if that's part of your issues. In the business side, we do succession and exit planning, key person insurance, non-qualified and qualified plans, and employee retention plans. It's really important to retain your people because losing someone to a death or a competitor can be devastating. Worksite education, we do about 60 seminars a year teaching financial literacy to corporations and municipalities. And it's really well received. We really help fill up the benefit book that's offered to the employees. And it's just something that's really looked at as a real value to the corporation municipalities how we teach this. We have like 30 different classes that we come in and work, teach to the employees. And then tying this all together, we're a protection-based firm, so risk management is very important. It's fun to play offense all the time, but you got to put some defensive stops in there in case something happens that's not in your control. So contingency planning, health insurance, life and disability insurance, of course, long-term care. Next slide. We have a link that you can get a business valuation. And I think it's very important that most businesses don't really know their valuation. It takes a long time. You know, it's a process to get it, and it's expensive. And within an hour, we can give you a business valuation, equity value, asset value, enterprise value, liquidation value. So you can do some planning around that. Typically speaking, this is a $2,000 offer. Anyone that's on this program today, we'll waive all the fees. And actually, we'll waive all the financial planning fees if you'd like to have a financial plan run, because we think that's important as well. Goals. Next slide. Next slide. Just going. Next slide. Okay. I also have a link that helps you with your health assessment of your business. So it gives you a score. And the arrow here is the industry average, wherever that might be, to whatever your industry you're in. And this needle is where you are. And you know, it could be red, it could be orange, it could be green. And then the key drivers that help you know what you're doing well in, what you need help in, what you're doing okay in. And it's the drivers that a bank looks to lend money, an investor looks to invest money, and a buyer looks to buy your company. And so having this assessment, this takes about 20 minutes to do, and it really is a great conversation piece. Next slide. So no matter what stage you're in, whether you're early stages, you're scaling your business, or you're already established, we have strategies that can fit in each one of these. There's options available for every one of these different areas that you're in, and Gardner Wallace will be happy to do this. And the last thing I want to say is I want to thank the Garland community and the Garland Chamber. It's the Garland Chamber team is the best team ever. It's something anything you need, they do for you. I just want to thank you, and I'm glad to be part of this program, and look forward to our speaker, who I'm sure you're waiting to hear, not me. Thank you very much.
You know, thank you, Robert. You and your organization, we appreciate the support. You know, guys, reach out. You know, it seems like he's an expert. So I really like those gauges to tell me where I am with the industry. That was fascinating. So great work with that. You know, so we thank them for their support and partnership. And, you know, the Garland Chamber's mission has continually been to act as servants, to be servant leaders, and to be trusted with unifying the sources of sustainable business growth. We bring this event to you as an opportunity to form the community about the impacts of the legislative process and this forum on education. The forum is recorded, and everyone will be receiving a link after the forum concludes. We will conclude at 9 a.m. sharply, okay? So even if we have extra questions and everything, we will stop at 9 a.m. After our Commissioner Morath speaks, that's when we'll do our Q&A on the chat feature. And depending on how long it takes will be dependent on how we have Q&As and how long we have them for. You know, so I wanted this opportunity, and it's an honor and a privilege to just introduce Mike Morath. I've been able to work with him since I started as superintendent, and this is my 8th year as superintendent. And this man has transformed what Texas education has been, and it hasn't been easy, y'all. And whenever we're used to our own comfort zones and we get taken out, it's never easy. And then we get hit with COVID. And guess what? The innovation didn't stop. That was a perfect time to say, hey, let's just go back. If you look at some states, they can't even get their teachers into work. And here we're still moving forward with innovation. He was part of the historic bill, House Bill 3, putting in his fingerprints on what children of diverse cultures like Garland needed. And so I just wanted to give a personal narrative before I give my introduction of him. And he was appointed by Greg Gabbett. Mike Morath served as our commissioner since January 2016. As commissioner, he heads the Texas Education Agency, which oversees pre-kinder through high school education for more than 5 million students enrolled in public schools. During his time in the agency, he has worked and focused on 4 priority areas: supporting our teachers and principals, building a strong foundation of reading math for all students, connecting high school to careers and college, and improving our state's low-performing schools. Prior to becoming the state's education commissioner, Mike Morath served on the Dallas Independent School District Board of Trustees for more than 40 years. He's a strong advocate for public education, and Commissioner Morath graduated from the original Garland High. So he's an ally, y'all. And thanks to the great public education he received in Texas, he went on to earn a bachelor's of business administration degree. He was summa cum laude from George Washington University in just 2.5 years. So the man is brilliant. So with that, I introduce our commissioner, Mike Morath.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lopez, for the kind introduction. Thank you for your friendship over the years. Thanks for the leadership that you bring for our kids. Our kids are lucky to have your dedication, professionalism, your heart. And I'm honored to work with you. I feel like if I'm talking to the Garland Chamber, I should open with like a Hail Garland High School, your beauty behold, we'll e'er be loyal to the black and the gold. Needless to say, I didn't have an illustrious singing career, but I did get a fantastic education at Garland High School. I graduated with 36 hours of college credit coming out of the IB program that Garland really pioneered. And a lot of what we bring our own lived experiences to whatever we do. And my upbringing in Garland had a, massive impact on me. My character, my interests, I wouldn't be commissioner of education, but for the support and love that educators in Garland poured into me over the years. And I'm tremendously grateful for it. But I also reflect on the challenges that we have in public education and how some of those challenges I can even see in the arc of my educational experiences in Garland. I graduated from Garland. And like I said, with 36 hours of college credit, I was so well equipped and prepared for my collegiate education. I feel like I went to school on the East Coast with a bunch of kids that went to these elite prep schools, private schools that their parents were dropping huge amounts of coin on. And I was better prepared than most of those kids. Also was pretty well-rounded compared to a lot of those kids in terms of my experience. I had, besides the academic instruction, I had 4 years of vocational training at Garland High School. I had 3 years of computer science. I had a year of typing, which don't sleep on typing as a skill. Like, I think that's literally saved a year of my life just because the speed with which I can type today. And those computer science classes, they were literally worth millions of dollars to me. I was blessed. I started a software company right out of college. It was a .com based in Garland. It was a catastrophic failure. We lost all of our investors' money, and I'm just glad I avoided alcoholism during the time period. But I picked myself up, dusted myself off, tried again, and my second company was vastly more successful. I was able to sell it in my mid-30s and sort of be quasi-retired. And that was in no small part due to the education that I got in Garland. But there's an underbelly to this, because when I graduated from Garland High School, I think our graduating class in Garland, this was in the 90s, we had maybe 300 or so graduates that I graduated with. But my freshman class at Garland High School, we had north of 600 kids in. And what happened? What happened to all my friends, my colleagues, my fellow students? They didn't get the same shake of the stick that I did. They weren't as well prepared coming into it. They didn't have all the same opportunities. And I think about that writ large, about the question of how do we make public education better for all 5.5 million souls in Texas. And again, the benefits that I got as a Garland Owl are also fairly unique. As I mentioned, I went through the IB program at Garland, and I had 3 years of computer science at Garland. I've looked this up since then. At the time, there were 5 high schools in all of Texas that had 3-year computer science programs at the time. And there were only about 20 high schools in Texas that had IB at the time. And I was literally at the only school in all of Texas that had both. And, you know, we graduate 300,000 to 400,000 kids a year. When we think about what we have to do at scale, what we have to do for all of our kids to meet our moral obligation to kids. And when I think about what motivates me, I want all of my brothers and sisters to have the same opportunities that I've had. And that's what we've got to do. We've got to make sure that the bright spots that exist in public education are not bright spots, that they are not even noticeable, that is just the norm, that we deliver for every kid, regardless of what neighborhood they grew up, regardless of what color they are, regardless of whether their parents speak English or not, regardless of whether they're in general education or special education, that every single child is equipped for success coming out of our public school system. And while we have improved markedly for 30 years in public education in Texas, we still have very significant challenges. If you reflect on the graduating class from, I don't know, the high school graduating class of 2018, 2017, 2016, fast forward 6 years later. So we're talking about 24-year-olds at this point. What percentage of Texas high school graduates after 6 years will have obtained either a 4-year bachelor's degree, a 2-year associate's degree, or a trade credential like a welding, Cisco systems engineer, something? What is that percentage right now, if you had to guess? Just kind of reflect on that to yourself. And reflect on even the audience at this chamber meeting. And how many people on this in this Zoom call do you think possess either a trade credential of some kind, or an associate's degree, or a bachelor's degree? The number is about 30%. About 30% of Texas high school graduates 6 years after graduation get some kind of meaningful post-secondary credential. And, maybe if this was the economy of the 1920s, that would be okay. But it ain't the economy of the 1920s. This is an economy that is constantly evolving, that competition is global, that we have got to equip huge percentages of our young people with the skills to access the American dream. And when you think about the rigors of participation in our modern republic, just being a citizen in this country and being able to read a tweet and separate fact from fiction, right? The degree of education that we need to provide to our young people, we've got to get better. And some people get depressed when they think about the picture of outcomes that we have, but and they think, back in my day, it was better then. Like we should just do what we did back in the whatever decade you grew up in. The thing is that our memories are deeply flawed. It wasn't better back then. The level of adult literacy in the 1970s in this country was materially lower than the level of adult literacy today. And the level of academic outcomes of kids is actually notably better today than it was back then. The thing is, we had blinders on as a society back then. There were whole swaths of our kids that we just didn't care about. We didn't notice. You think about students in special education in particular, which up until like the 1970s might not even been in school. And so this is a journey of continuous improvement that we are on, and we have improved materially. Our educators have poured their heart and their love into our kids, but we still have to get better. We have to get better faster. And coronavirus has not helped us at all. At the most recent data point, we showed that 56% of kids in Texas were in classrooms, meaning 44% of kids were still being educated at home. And while remote instruction for some of our kids has been great, for the vast majority of our kids, remote instruction has not met their normal needs educationally. And so the gaps that we have between the educational haves and have-nots is only exacerbated this year. And this is perhaps the greatest crisis in 100 years in American public education. And the impact of coronavirus will be significant if we don't get very serious about how we respond. Hurricane Katrina, we studied extensively, and the kids that were affected by Hurricane Katrina that came to Texas, within 4 years after intense remediation, those students caught up to state averages in reading, and they never caught up in math. And this is a much bigger hurricane. And going back even further than that, in Argentina, there was a teacher strike for about 88 days in the early 1980s. Researchers have studied that. What happened is the kids just lost 3 months of instruction, and then they came back and there was no systemic adjustment. We just came back, pick up business as usual. Those kids failed throughout the rest of their academic tenure at much higher rates than the kids immediately before the strike. They were held back more often. They graduated from high school at lower rates. They graduated from college at lower rates. Economists have studied it. There was a 20-year impact on the gross domestic product of Argentina because of an 88-day teacher strike. And that is what we are looking at if we don't get very, very serious about adjusting how our system works and adjusting at a scale of almost 9,000 schools in Texas, 5.5 million kids, 700,000 employees, 300 plus thousand classrooms. And it's not going to get better with just good management, because we got a lot of great leaders like Dr. Lopez. It's not going to get better if only we hired people that work harder, because that is not a need in public education. Our people work their tails off. They're working 60 hours a week, every week. And sometimes coming home crying about something that, some story that a kid told them. It is going to take adjustments in practice at a scale that we haven't done before. It's going to take systemic focus on supporting our teachers, our educators, making sure that we recognize that not all teachers are equally skilled, that some teachers actually do deliver more than a year's worth of gain in a year. Do we know the difference between those teachers? Can we give those teachers to the kids that are most behind and redeploy our staff? Can we update our staffing models in terms of how we support our teachers and how we deploy them? Co-teaching, for example, and far more models. And work to adjust the way that school works so that we're growing teacher talent faster than ever before, that we're onboarding new teachers in ways that we haven't before. If you've driven down highways in Texas, you have probably seen billboards that say something like, "Want to teach, when can you start?" And that is basically wrong. There is the teaching profession is as difficult as neurosurgery, because what teachers do is they walk into operating rooms where the patients are not asleep and they're operating on 20 brains simultaneously. This is the work. This is extremely difficult work, and we've got to invest in our early career teachers so that they have a year residency, much like you have in the medical profession. I mean, if we approached brain surgery like we approach teaching, we would have patients dying on the operating table. We're like, "Hey, you got a bachelor's degree. Here's a classroom. Knock yourself out. Hey, you got a bachelor's degree. Here's a brain. Go ahead and crack it open." So the work that we do to invest in our teachers is going to have to change, and change quickly. But even if we waved a magic wand and solved the challenges of the teaching profession, every year we have new five-year-olds that enter the system. And, there are kids that are born to households that have a doctor and a lawyer as the parents. I think like the Huxtables. And then there are kids that don't have that. And what their opportunities were in their first 5 years of life are materially different. You got some kids walking into kindergarten that are already like a year behind developmentally. I mean, think about that. That's 20% behind in life. And what would our teachers have to do if that was the case? Because like in that kindergarten year, if that's the classroom that I'm teaching, then I got to get a year and 3 months worth of gain in 1 year's worth of time. And then my partner in first grade and second grade and third grade all have to do the same thing. And if I've done that 4 years in a row, then I've caught those kids up. So, I mean, all that requires is perfection. It's quite simple. But you can't predicate a system. You can't build a system predicated on perfection. So what do we do to shift resources and attention into the early years of life and into the early grades? Because teaching humans how to read, like, this ain't easy. This is in fact rocket science. Humans were born knowing how to talk. Any of you that are parents have picked up on that little gem with your little nuggets in the house. They start babbling, they start forming words, they start forming sentences, and you cannot shut them up after this. I speak with some authority, parent of 4 kids. The twins are 2.5, and they're a handful. But learning how to talk and learning how to read ain't the same thing. I got to take these weird symbols on this 2-dimensional plane that's in front of me and translate those symbols into sound and fluently decode that and understand all the words of the English language. And by the way, there are a lot of words in the English language, and some of those words have a lot of nuance of meaning that are pretty complex. So making sure that we have the right curricular resources, that we have the right structure to get all of our children literate as rapidly as possible. This is difficult work. This is why we have to focus on building a strong foundation in reading and mathematics and numeracy, because the skills that you learn, the mathematics that you learn in the early grades will unlock all orders of higher, of logic for you. If you think, you think like algebra might be hard, if you didn't figure out what a denominator was, like intuitively, you can't relate that concept of ratios to the real world in 3rd grade. By the time you get to algebra and cross multiplication becomes a thing, you're done. This work of building strong foundations in our kids' knowledge base, this is critical. But you also have to remember kids are at the other end of their educational journey in high school. And I reflect back on my time as a Garland Owl. I was sweating my tail off my senior year. I had to write an extended essay. Felt like that thing was a master's thesis. It's 80 pages. My memory makes it longer and longer every time I think it was like an 8-page essay, but might have only been 4. But by golly, the time has passed, and that thing seems like it was I had to give birth to something. Like we had to work hard our senior year academically and from a career perspective, preparing us to launch us, because life was fixing to get a lot more complicated. And there are a lot of kids who their senior year doesn't look like that. It's prom, it's homecoming, it's cruising for chicks. I think that still happens. And although I will say that is fairly complicated. This work that we do to re-engineer the high school experience, to connect it to career and college, to be a launching pad. Like, your senior year should be the most difficult academic year that you are exposed to. And that's not true for a lot of kids yet, but it is becoming true as leaders like Dr. Lopez and others work to re-engineer the high school experience to connect it to college and career. This is all necessary work. And it's, but it's also important for us to recognize that we do have education is a moral enterprise. This is about living the founding ideals of this country, that all men are created equal, that we're endowed with certain rights, the right to pursue happiness. And our system of public education is the deliverer of those rights. It is the thing that equips us for the journey, because the American dream is not for the faint at heart. We've got, this is a meeting of the chamber. We got people who have started their own businesses here, and like, you too can pursue the American dream. It's for twice the hours and half the pay. Like, this is tough work. Succeeding in modern America, and education is what prepares us for that journey. And there are places where what we are doing isn't preparing kids for that journey, and we need to recognize, we need to be open and honest with ourselves about it. And we don't need to cast moral judgment on that situation. We need to take action to remedy that situation. We need to say, we are going to wrap our arms around this school or this group of schools and recognize that, yes, what is happening in those schools is not yet adequate for our children, but we will make adjustments. We will be disruptive in some cases if need be. We will do exactly what is necessary to give our kids what they deserve. This is the work of of our fourth key priority of improving low performing schools. This all rests on a transparent performance framework that, like, we got to know what our kids learn. The thing about working in public education is we are blessed in our schools that we attract missionaries, people who love children. But there's a flip side of that this compassion can fool us. If you have a child who comes to you and that child is from a background of homelessness, and that child is struggling to turn in assignments in your classroom, what do you do as an educator? You say, I know you are going through tremendous struggle, and so it's okay that you didn't get your homework turned in. That is a normal human emotion. And that is damaging to that child, because life is awfully Darwinian. Like when you go and apply for a job, your employer wants to know, what can you do for me today? They might be interested in what you overcame as a child, but you've got to be able to deliver results. And so we have a set of expectations. It's a moral code built actually into the legislative framework of public education, that we believe that all children can learn and achieve at high levels. And it's not like some abstract belief. We believe that every third grader in Texas should have memorized their times tables. Like that's a thing. It's written down. The State Board of Education has adopted it. It's an expectation. And when we say every child, we don't mean unless you don't speak English at home. We don't mean unless you're a poor. We don't mean unless you are whatever color, unless you are in special education. We literally mean every child should have memorized their times tables in third grade. It's important because it's a building block skill. And if we get behind, if we don't get you what you need, are you going to be able to work in computer science? Are you going to be able to work as a skilled carpenter? And so this focus on being honest with ourselves. This is, there's a lot of ink spilled on this topic, and it's spilled not in this arena where we test our kids every year. We use it to evaluate our adults every year. This is what we have. Like the STAR test tells us, this is what kids need to know. This is what they need to be able to do at the end of the year. We roll that up and we report publicly how the schools are doing. And that causes a great deal of consternation, but it's important. We've got to be moving towards getting our kids results so that they can be successful in life. So we do this. We do it every year without fail. I was talking to somebody the other day, had an old school teacher. Comes in and he had broken his right arm. And as a result, he didn't do his writing assignment. And so all the kids are responding. And to the teacher, and the teacher's like, all right, Harold, where's your assignment? And Harold's like, oh, Miss Johnson, I broke my right arm. And without skipping a beat, Miss Johnson says, you didn't break your left. This is what we have to do for our kids. It's a set of expectations that we have to have, and we have to support them. We have to support them with love, because like life does throw some curveballs. COVID is a big curveball, but let's not forget about what happened to all the kids in Argentina, where it was like 90 days, no school. Let's just come back and forget about it as if nothing happened. For us as adults, that might be true, but there are very high stakes for our kids. It just won't show up for them for another 10 or 15 years. So anyways, I feel honored to work with professionals like Dr. Lopez. We're blessed in public education in Texas to have so many skilled leaders. And I feel blessed to have a job where every day I get to wake up and think about how to help 5.5 million souls. It's the best job on the planet, although it does not come without some controversy. I'm excited to talk to folks in my old stomping grounds. I miss Garland. So I'll shut up for now. Dr. Lopez, turn it back over to you. See if folks have some questions.
I just want to reiterate some of the things that you're saying before we get to questions. First of all, I want the public to understand that when our commissioner talks about getting kids for college careers in life, he means it. He took a very innovative approach by putting that as part of our accountability system. So one of the things that we have to understand is we hear about STAR all the time, but what we really don't hear about is a new system called CCMR, and that's career military readiness. A matter of fact, on one of my first few days on the job, Mark King cornered me and says, "Man, I need to know that the kids are being ready for life after school in Garland. And how do we know that?" And every time I saw him, and finally I started giving him statistics. When I first got here, of course, it was a new measure, but I just want everybody to know all 7 of our high schools under the current system last year would have received an A for college career, meeting the college career military readiness standards. And we're on track to do it again this year. So in full closure, not working, that means kids have to pass their SATs, take IB or AP tests, pass those, get into TSIA, which gets you into college. All of those measures are part of it. Okay, so it's not just an easy grade to get. And so I want everybody to know when he talks about let's get kids ready now and we're measuring to see how successful you are, it's part of our accountability system. We have a few questions, uh, Commissioner Morath, and I'm going to start with Curie. He put, we are approaching 1 full year in this COVID-19 pandemic. As Garland Tutoring Company and a father of a Saxe High School senior, Run Mustangs Run, I am seeing firsthand the psychological impact COVID-19 has on our youth, coupled with educational and family economic losses. We are now approaching the summer where we are likely to have more educational losses. What is the state's plan to bridge businesses and education to help flatten the education losses?
Yeah, I would say that at present, there's probably 2 paths that we're pursuing of relevance to that question. One is we are working on a coordinated plan to facilitate supports for school districts to engage at a large scale in what is sometimes referred to as high dose tutoring. And so the tutoring has been found to work under the right conditions. Under the wrong conditions, it's not like not useless. It's just not particularly effective. So we are working to try to both encourage school districts to pursue this, to equip them with resources to do so, and school districts should be getting a huge influx of resources relatively soon to support their broad COVID acceleration work. And then also to provide a set of statewide technical assistance supports. I think like vetted partners that you can use from a tutoring perspective, vetted tutoring curricula, mechanisms to help operationalize it more effectively. So that's one thing that we're doing. That speaks to the sort of academic side of things, but not necessarily the sort of emotional toll that it's having on kids. I want to, but a part of your question was also connecting business to schools. There's a particular sort of change or reform in high school that has proven to bear real fruit for kids in terms of connecting employers with kids while they're in high school, and it's a high school model called P-TECH. And what this is it's sort of the easiest way to describe it is a 3-legged stool, where one leg of the stool is the high school. One leg of the stool is a local community college or university, and the final leg of the stool is an employer or a set of employers. And the high school reorients its curricular experience for kids so that over the course of 4 years, they end up with, able to receive a trade-focused associate's degree as an 18-year-old. Mind you, like these are kids who graduate from high school with a college degree. With a college degree not in like basket weaving, but a college degree that's in a specific trade trade focus. And through the same period, they've had a lot of employment experience already. So work-based learning, this is a key part of why employers are at the table. So they come out with a job offer too, and these are generally high-wage job offers as an 18-year-old. So you think like first-generation students, this is like life-changing. It's sort of family status changing. But employers, it's not successful without bringing employers to the table. So we're looking at a huge infusion of resources to help schools go through the transformation and launch process to become P-TECH. And so this is planning resources, both for the school and for businesses that are at the table, as well as like sometimes you need to invest in capital. So you can think like an advanced CTE lab of some kind. And so this would be extra grant money to cover the costs of those capital costs too.
You know, those P-TECHs are such a great innovation. You know, we're capitalizing on them. At Saxe, our P-TECH is with the education, building future educators pipeline. So those partners are with universities and everything else. That was a brilliant segue to P-TECHs. You know, I have two board members I just want to give a shout out to, with Linda Griffin and Larry Glick online, the two LGs. They've been on our board for a number of years, and I thank you for participating. My next question is coming from Erica Crump, and Dr. Crump is the principal of our CTE center. And so she asks, as a result of the pandemic, we're realizing that families do want options for their students. Most families do prefer face-to-face educational experiences. However, some families do wish virtual instruction model for their children. To respond to the need, will Texas school districts be approved to provide a virtual school option to families?
That is a good question that I don't have a firm answer to, because the legislature is currently deliberating that question as we speak. In fact, there was a committee meeting on that topic yesterday in the State House. There are bills in both chambers to facilitate a continued support for remote instruction. I actually kind of think the future is not remote per se, but hybrid. Imagine a kid who does a lot of independent study at home, but also comes to school for different experiences, CTE lab, extracurriculars, that sort of thing. We have seen a lot of innovation. Garland's actually a real shining light in that space, and we definitely want to support the good. And then you have to be able to support the good while trying to minimize the bad, as it were.
Right. We're going to be anxiously waiting for that. So the answer to that is contact your legislatures to support this type of bill, so then schools can get their funding. Some of the things we need to realize that the commissioner has to enforce. It's not his idea or anything else. It comes from legislation such as testing, and then create what we have to do, or monitor what we have to do. And this is one of the things that we need legislator approval on. Mark King, who I mentioned earlier, has a question. He says the 30% number has been with us for some time, along with many problems discussed. Name 3 things that will be done differently in the next 2 years to create change.
One, I think, is that the P-TECH program that I mentioned. So that has recently, law was changed 2 years ago, so that districts now have a financial incentive to launch a P-TECH model. On average, about 1% of Texas high school students graduate with an associate's degree. In the first generation of P-TECH, it was 6 times that high. In the next generation of P-TECH, I actually anticipate it being more like 30 times that high. So that is a big change, and it takes a time for that to filter through the system. Let me go to the early end of the spectrum, and this will take forever for anybody to notice, but the legislature also supported a set of changes in how teachers are supported in early grade instruction that happens in literacy. So every single K through 3 teacher and principal in the state of Texas is going through a 1-year fellowship between now and 2 years from now on evidence-based, basically the science of teaching reading, and how to change practice to get every kid up to proficiency in reading. That is a very big change. There's a set of changes related to curriculum that are also tied to it, and assessment practices that are tied to it. But within about 3 years, there's going to be a monstrous overhaul in how reading instruction happens in the foundation grades, kindergarten through 3rd grade. You have to then, one of the challenges of education is you have to move with a burning sense of patience, because it will take 10 years for people to really notice the impact of that reform, because kids got to grow up in the system. But that will have a very significant long-term impact on that 30% number, because the level of foundational skill building that is happening in Texas schools is undergoing sort of a profound shift, starting basically this current year, and shifting over the next several years.
I want to first apologize to Dr. Crump. I forgot, my mind slipped. She is our CTE director. She was at the GRCTC and opened it up, and her presence is appreciated. We have another question coming in from our trustee, Linda Griffin, and she says, thanks for being here, first of all. And what is the update on ESSER 3? How will it be distributed to each school district? And when?
So for those that aren't familiar, the Uncle Sam has passed I don't know, the dump truck of money for schools bills several times now. So there's a program in the CARES Act, which you may have heard about. There's a program called ESSER, which stands for something money for school districts, basically. So there were 3 rounds of ESSER appropriations made. One that provided $1.2 billion of funding to Texas schools, one that provided $5.5 billion of funding to Texas schools, and one that provides $12 billion of funding to Texas schools. So in the entirety, that's like $18 billion. The law stipulates that is going to be distributed to Texas schools based upon their proportion of Title I schools. So Title I is another federal program that's tied to the number of low-income students that you have. So what that kind of means is, think of a school district like Highland Park, which you all are familiar with. They basically get no federal assistance throughout this entire time period. And a district like Garland will get probably hundreds of millions of dollars in total from that, from those 3 allocations.
Great. So Mac asks, thank you for your time. You shared that many students receiving remote instruction are not meeting normal needs. With the trend in higher education moving more towards courses being offered online, do you see graduates trending toward traditional delivery methods or online delivery methods?
It's a good question. I mean, like the thing to bear in mind is that our kids are very different. So there are some kids that need, even when they're 19, need a great deal of structure and control to the framework. And those kids are going to benefit from kind of a very regimented brick and mortar schedule. There are other kids that have a much more, creative bent to them, and or a lot higher levels of personal agency. And so those kids can flourish in a sort of a non-traditional environment. I think you're going to see growth in variations in the service delivery model is the best way to describe that. You're going to see different approaches. I think one of the keys is for us to make sure that we can counsel and match the best approach on a child-by-child basis. A child that flourishes in remote and feels stymied in brick and mortar, you don't want them to go to brick and mortar. You want to get them to go to remote, and vice versa. Making sure that we can guide our kids appropriately to help them pursue the path of highest achievement for them is going to be important in this concept. It's also it's important that we gotta part of this work is growing their own ability to guide themselves. I think of the old story about the caterpillar that was struggling to get out of the cocoon, and out of a sense of compassion, you sort of slice it open so that the caterpillar gets out, but as a result didn't have enough oomph to strengthen their wings and couldn't fly as a butterfly, right? So you've got to make sure that you also allow your kids to fail, because there is no learning without failure. You just have to prevent them from failing catastrophically. So, I mean, this is a balancing act that both educators and parents sort of all have to figure out, and it's very difficult. It's a very difficult work.
That's a great analogy. I love it. I'm gonna steal that from you. We have a follow-up question. It's on the private chat here, but it's from Russell Duckworth. He wants to follow up to trustees Griffin's question about the CARES Act. What strings do you see attached with the spending? So people don't get this $100 million and then spend it on things that aren't there? What do you see?
That is a very significant question being entertained by the legislature at the moment, which is why Dr. Lopez and many of his peers are kind of annoyed with us because we haven't released these funds just yet. The federal law comes with extremely light strings. There is a whole category. There's a whole set of categories that you can spend the money in, and then you can spend it any way you want inside those categories. And the categories are like really broad. A concern would be you get this one-time infusion of the equivalent of $17 billion, and it's like kind of a Brewster's Million situation. And you're like, hey, everybody, congratulations. We're going to give everybody a $25,000 raise. And then 2 years from now, Mardi Gras is over. What happens? There's I think wise ways to use that money that benefit kids. And then there are ways to spend the money that doesn't benefit much of anybody. Trying to figure that out is I think a big topic of discussion at the moment.
I'm going to ask a follow-up question. This is coming from me. Traditionally, what happens is when these type of infusions come to the state uses it also to offset their deficits. Traditionally, that has happened since.
Every time.
Yes,
it has happened every time. Yes.
Right. So do we see that happening again, or?
Yeah, the technical term Dr. Lopez is referring to is something called supplant. Basically, is this new money? Is it supplemental? Or is the state going to say reduce spending in public education in another way because all this new federal money is coming in? And so my guess is it'll be a mix of the two. There's so much money that it can't all be supplanted. There will be new money coming into the system. It's just kind of a question of how much is net new versus how much is used to fund the system as a whole. There are, while there's not a whole lot of strings to school districts on this money, this is not well understood. There are some very significant strings to the state for this money that also have not actually been fully figured out yet. And so that's got to get figured out as well. And like I said, those strings are not actually well understood by people who I talk to pretty regularly that are dialed in on these federal dollars.
Great. And another question that I'm going to ask is that next year is going to be a year of recovery for learning loss. How is the Texas agency for just the public, you've been doing this for a while now, going to share best practices with the rest of the stakeholders in the state to showcase school districts that are doing a significant job of accelerating that?
That's a great question. And just as a point of clarification, I think we have a 4 or 5 year journey of catching up in front of us, not a 1 year journey of catching up. Only the most unique, the rarest of districts will be able to catch up in time. There's a few districts that COVID did not have as much of a disruption on them. And so as a kid, the relative level of their kids is maybe only slightly below normal. But anyway, so we got a big multi-year effort in front of us. That being said, we try to communicate very aggressively with our key education stakeholders, which from our perspective, it's, we don't support individual class. If you think about the mission of TEA, it's to provide leadership guidance and support to school systems to improve student outcomes. And so the first audience for us is school boards and superintendents because they're the ones leading their school systems. Although we do work with parents directly and teachers as well. It's just, it's sort of like if you think back to your U.S. history class, there's federalism, certain power that you have, certain power that you don't have. We try to publish, we have research reports, we have, PowerPoint decks, this kind of thing that is broadly available on our website. We have forums that we discuss this stuff on a regular basis. But I will say that communicating about the complexity of education practice to broad audience is not a core competency of the Texas Education Agency. we're trying to get better at communicating broadly, but it's just not something that we're perfect at. We're doing that work as well as we can. It's just it's if you're a highly motivated stakeholder, you'll be able to find your information from us. If you're a passing stakeholder, it's going to be harder for us to reach you.
Yeah, it's really complicated, and you're right. It's going to be a multi-year process. One of the things that you were in your talks, you talked about even the effects of the hurricane in Houston, right? One of the things that you brought up was it was harder to recover from numeracy than literacy. Did you want to expand what you have learned through the process and investigating our recovery? And
Yeah, I mean, now we'll get really geeked out and talk about curriculum and instruction practices and how the brain works. Let's talk literacy first, which most people think is not as bad and it's not as harmed by the storm, but it actually hides a factor related to literacy instruction that is actually, I think, far more problematic. How do little humans learn how to read? So there's a framework for this. Cognitive science has studied this more than just about anything. And the easiest way to think about it is a mathematical formula that's called the simple view of reading. And it's decoding times language comprehension equals reading. So if you think about the times, if decoding is a 0 and language comprehension is a 1, that means you're not reading. If language comprehension is a 0 and decoding is a 1, that means you're not reading, right? These are multiplicative of one another. So decoding is a set of skills that is learned generally from about the age of 4 to about the age of 8. And it's what I think most people classically think of as the ability to read, which is I can take these weird symbols that are in front of me and I can turn them into words in my head and speak them. That's what decoding is. And so this is why, like, everybody on this call, I'm sure you've heard the phrase sound it out, right? So this is what sounding it out is. This is in fact phonics. As it turns out, about half of kids learn to decode on their own. It's some anomaly of their brain. They're natural code breakers. And believe it or not, those kids tend to have high mathematics aptitude because they're literally breaking a code. But the other half of kids, they don't learn how to decode without very explicit step-by-step instructions, and the steps matter. So like you do the sound first, because it's like the easiest vocalized sound in the English language to make, and there's about 44 sounds in the English language, and it's important from this perspective for kids to have learned, like, not that it's called the letter D, but that it makes a d sound, right? This is the decoding aspect. So that is core instruction activity that has to happen in the elementary grades, very early years, and once it's done, it's done. Think of the other side of that language, that formula for a second, language comprehension. That's actually like, do you know what words mean? If you read The Emperor's New Clothes, the Hans Christian Andersen's classic, right, and you don't know what an empire is, and you can't distinguish an empire from a democracy, from a republic, like, why is it that they're not telling the emperor that he's naked? Because we talk a lot of smack to a president. We would just tell the president he's naked. What's the differences in nuance of that meaning? The emperor is walking around in fine clothing and is very interested in fine clothing. Like, what does that mean? Because every time my parents talk to me and they ask me if I'm fine and I feel okay, is that okay clothing? Because that's not what fine means in that context. As it turns out, like, decoding, we can explicitly teach, and we've got teachers that are trained to do it. Language comprehension, though, is a function of every word you've ever heard in your life, and every lived experience that you've ever had, which is the reason why there are strong correlations between poverty and literacy. Because there's not, like, being poor does not prevent you from having the skill of reading, but being poor might deprive you from being exposed to, like, trips to the Grand Canyon, where you can see and understand the concept of majesty implicitly in ways that if you never walked anywhere outside of your neighborhood, that's nothing but apartment complexes, you don't understand. And so this requires us to have curriculum in our schools that is very intentional, that builds knowledge in kids, even when the kids' parents can't take them to see the world. And not every school does that. And so when you think like kids are taking a dive in mathematics that's very deep, and they're taking a dive that's somewhat shallow in reading because of the storm, well, they're still listening to all the words they hear at home while they're impacted by COVID. But if they happen to choose the wrong parents, like the amount of vocabulary they're hearing at home is different. And so the work that we have to do to accelerate instruction in literacy is actually, I think, far more difficult than the work that we have to do to accelerate instruction in mathematics. But the kids have lost a lot more mathematics instruction because you will learn how to read as a function of language comprehension simply by living in this life. Like the language that you learn, you speak, you're exposed to all the time. But your parents are not often sitting you down going over mathematics instruction with you. And so when you lose all your school time, you lose a lot of mathematics instruction, a lot of mathematics instruction. This is the reason why you're seeing a much bigger decline in math scores than you are in literacy scores. And it's going to require us to adjust to bring kids back up in mathematics, to give them more time and rigorous instruction than we have before. But if we think like literacy is just going to take care of itself, what we're actually telling our system is that literacy is going to take care of itself for the Morath kids, but not for kids in, say, certain foster care settings, or homeless kids, or kids that come from, that don't have a doctor as a mom and the commissioner of education as a dad. So it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of context in all curricular areas to accelerate and meet our kids where we need to. Sorry if that got a little nerdy.
No, the passion came out. I love it. It just flowed out. And I'm glad our audience got to see how passionate you are about the most essential functions of any school system. It's been an honor to have you, sir. And thank you for your time. Let's give Commissioner Morath a big round of applause. You can snap, clap, thank you again for coming. And, your leadership is felt across the state. I also want to thank the Gardner Wallace Financial institution for sponsoring this event. Please, everybody, mark your calendars for these next two up and coming events. We got a candidates forum for local city council and GISD election candidates. That's going to be April 14th at 7:30 in the morning. Then on April 28th, we're going to have a legislative briefing from the Governor's Economic and Development Office. So those two big things are coming up. Stay tuned. We appreciate you all coming out. Registration will be at the chamber website. We are adjourned. Have a beautiful day. Thank you again, Commissioner Morath.
Giga Mouse. See y'all.